We are inside of the gazebo because it's 92 degrees outside today, and I just want to be comfortable. Today we're going to have a video talking about the Civil War. This is one of my favorite subjects in life, and I get so passionate when I talk about the Civil War because I've studied the Civil War, I want to say, since I was 11, maybe younger than 11. I might have started studying the Civil War at 9 or 10 years old, but I can't really remember. Anywhere, somewhere between the ages of 9 and 11, I started studying the Civil War, and ever since then, I've fallen deeper and deeper in love with the topic. And the reason this Sunday I decided to make the video be about the Civil War is because I'm still hearing a lot of things from my own personal friends and my own network about people who misunderstand what the Civil War was really about, the purpose for the Civil War, because a lot of us watching this video, some of y'all have been raised in different countries. And when I say Civil War, I'm talking about the American Civil War, okay? Some of y'all are from different countries, and some of y'all come from different states where the Civil War was not taught fully in an educated manner, okay? It wasn't taught in a proper manner from both sides so you can see the opinion of everybody. But what I'm gonna do in this video, and I'm gonna make it as short as possible, because a lot of people ramble on in their YouTube videos, and I hate that. I'm gonna explain to you what the Civil War was about, how it got started, and why the South had perfectly good reasons to rebel from the North. Now, the Civil War, the start of the Civil War really goes back 100 years before actually the war started. It goes back to the time, or almost 100, about 70 to 100 years before the war started. It goes back towards the times of Adams and Jefferson. And it goes back towards the time of they were putting out acts to stop slavery. A common misconception is that the Civil War was about slavery. In actuality, slavery was a secondary issue to what the Civil War was actually about. The Civil War was really fought about the right to unilateral succession. Could a state unilaterally succeed? Now, in the year 1788, South Carolina ratified the U.S. Constitution. Okay. The only states that didn't ratify, I believe, because they only needed 9 states to ratify out of the 13 states that existed at that time. So when they got their 9, they kept it pushing. But the other 4 states, technically for the time periods before they ratified, the South argued, and was correct in their argument, the South argued that those states were independent, sovereign nations unto themselves. So that includes Virginia, North Carolina, Rhode Island, and I want to say New York. Virginia, North Carolina, Rhode Island. I want to say New York. I could be wrong about that. But those 4 states actually operated as briefly, for a brief period in history, as sovereign nations unto themselves. Now, I still have the argument, is Rhode Island actually a state? Because if you know that Rhode Island was the only state without, even though they did ratify, they were the very last to ratify the U.S. Constitution, they were the only state that didn't hold a constitutional convention. So I still, in the back of my mind, I tweeted this out the other day. I guess it went over people's heads because no one responded. But in the back of my mind, I still question the fact of whether Rhode Island is actually a state. I'll just throw that out there for somebody else to pick up on. But it started back in the 1700s. What you guys have to understand is the Declaration of Independence. You probably were taught this in high school or college. Some of you were even luckily taught this in middle school or elementary. The Declaration of Independence was never a legally enforceable document. It was a declaration, just like it was named to be. It was a declaration. It was never legally enforceable. Even to this day, it has never been legally enforceable. So a lot of people don't understand that. That's why I'm stating this statement. A lot of people don't understand that the Declaration of Independence has never been enforceable. With that being said, you have to realize that the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776, and at that time we were right in the middle of the Revolutionary War. A lot of people have the thought in their mind that the Declaration of Independence was signed prior to the Revolutionary War or after, and this isn't true. See, so this is really a historical video that I'm putting out to get people's history correct, and to get people to understand that the South actually did, and people don't like to admit this. Black people, white people, like a lot of people in America did not like to admit the truth about the South. Okay? Was the South morally wrong for owning slaves? Of course. Was the North morally wrong for owning slaves? Of course. Have people in the South lied about statistics about slavery? Yes. Have people in the South lied about the history of slavery and the history of the Civil War? Yes. But the same thing has occurred in the North. Not on the same level. There's greater lies told in the South. But in this video, I'm here to put some of those lies to bed and really, guys, give you a clear view of what the Civil War was about. So it all goes back to this Declaration of Independence, which, when we start talking about leading up to the Articles of Confederation, we start talking about the basis on the legal basis on what the South used to justify their right to secede. And this all starts with our 7th Vice President, who I may or may not be a relative of, John C. Calhoun, okay, whose mother's surname was Caldwell from South Carolina. And I am a descendant of the Caldwells of South Carolina, okay? So John C. Calhoun was a staunch believer in slavery. He was originally from Virginia. All these people were from Virginia, okay? And that's important to note. Like I said, Virginia and North Carolina at one period of time were independent principalities unto their own self. That's why you see a lot of racism even till today in Virginia and North Carolina, because these areas were staunchly independent and made most of their money off of slavery. But as the United States started to expand, as we move into the 1800s, the 19th century, as the United States started to expand, they also started to improve their technology in manufacturing, specifically in manufacturing, leaving the South behind economically, because the South has always been dependent on agriculture. The Carolinas, North and South, are known for tobacco and their agricultural goods. These areas, such as South Carolina and Georgia, could not be properly the land in these two states specifically could not be properly sowed and tilled without slave labor. Okay, so the North they knew this. So what they did is said, we're gonna completely forget that the South even exists, and what we're gonna do is take Texas, California, and New Mexico. And they wanted to take some of actual Mexico too. That is why the Mexican-American War started. The Mexican-American War started over Texas. Texas was owned completely by Mexico, and the U.S. stole it. And the same goes for California and New Mexico. The U.S. stole all three of these states from Mexico and fought for the right to and killed so many Mexicans for the right to secede. Now, Santa Anna actually gave the land of Texas to the United States when he was defeated. But Santa Anna did not have the legal right for Mexico to give that land to the United States. Okay, so that's why the Mexican-American War was started, over that legal claim to Texas. This all leads up to the Civil War, because as the U.S. was expanding and as the North was expanding in manufacturing, they wanted to use the cotton fields of the South were already in a bad state way before the Civil War. Now let me go back to John C. Calhoun, because I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here. John C. Calhoun didn't learn his hatred of blacks and the slaves from South Carolina. He learned all of his hatreds of blacks from Yale College in Connecticut. At the time, Connecticut had the first law school in America. It wasn't Harvard. It wasn't William and Mary. The first law school in America was Litchfield Law School, which was based out of Connecticut. And a lot of people from Litchfield Law School actually graduated from Yale College, and they were teaching about how slaves were subservient to whites in America. They were teaching this at Yale. So it didn't come from the South. The South had these beliefs, but the academic portion of it came from Yale in Connecticut. So when John C. Calhoun was educated there, he graduated from these two schools and went back to the South Carolina with these rights, because what he learned was that the South was arguing against Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution. I believe the U.S. Constitution, Article 4, right? And Article 4 fights for a more perpetual union. And I may get some of these articles and things mixed up. But what I'm basically trying to say is that the South had a right to succeed. And that right was based upon, incorrectly was based upon the Declaration of Independence, because like I said, that's not legally enforceable. But the other rights, it was based on international law, which is, you can look up a book called The Law of Nations by Vattel, which was the premier international law book of the time. Benjamin Franklin was known to give copies out to all of his friends and everyone in Congress. Okay, they used that as a purpose to see. They also used the 10th Bill of Rights, which states that all states are sovereign, like have the right to their own sovereignty. They used the Articles of Confederation. And then they also, and then they used their own state constitution to prove this. So it all really got kicked off around the time when the North decided to do a tariff of abomination, which was also known as the Tariff of 1822. The Tariff of 1822 basically wanted to do like a 37% tax on all foreign goods that came into the country. And the South, specifically South Carolina, didn't like this. So there were protests, there were riots all in the streets. So 10 years later, they came back and they did the Tariff of 1832 and the Tariff of 1833. Both of these tariffs, all three of these tariffs were not respected by the South because it was bleeding the South. The South was already broke, but the South actually had banks. If you look up BSSC, which is the Bank of South Carolina, this was a bank that was open from before the war until after the war, and actually really funded most of the Confederacy. Now, if you look up the history of the Confederacy, most of their officers and generals were either trained at West Point or the University of, in three major institutions. Four. West Point, the University of Virginia, the University of South Carolina, and the University of Georgia. These four institutions are the true institutions of the South, even though West Point is in New York, okay? There was an incident up at West Point called the Eggnog Riot, and about 70 soldiers were kicked out of school for at the time you could not bring alcohol into the dorms. So for this Christmas party, they brought alcohol, and the 70 men that were kicked out, most of them were from the South. So they went on to live their lives, and in the future became prominent Confederate generals and colonels. Okay, but John C. Calhoun didn't like these tariffs, so he was writing all of these papers and all of these diatribes against the North for putting these tariffs against the South. Well, it built up, it kept building, the anger kept growing, and then South Carolina finally said, we've had enough. These are the reasons why we're leaving. And all of that eventually led to the Battle of Fort Sumter, because they felt like that the U.S. Economy was trying to wean itself off of slavery and move into a more technological age and let the South die. And that's what that was all about. So what you have to understand here in this video is what I'm telling you. The Civil War was not about slavery. It was about unilateral secession. Now, the U.S. Constitution at the time did not have any law that specifically said those states could not secede and form their own unions. Okay? There was no place in the law that said this. It wasn't until Appomattox Courthouse, at Appomattox Courthouse, where General Robert E. Lee surrendered, the South lost militarily, and they were forced to come back into the Union. So there was no international law and there was no national law that stopped them from succeeding. And the only way that they would have been successful was through military might, just like any other nation state. Okay? Before the war, though, there was a case of 1845. I think it's Leesburg Pollock. I forget it exactly. I told my friends this the other day. It's an 1845 case about the state's rights. And could a state unilaterally succeed unto itself? And the question wasn't yes, and the answer wasn't no. And that's why the Civil War had to be fought, because there was no legal question. So all of those soldiers died, and all of those slaves died, and all of those people in the Civil War died fighting to answer a legal question, not fighting to answer a moral question. Because before the Civil War started, everyone knew that slavery was morally wrong. You got to realize Britain and most of the world had already ended slavery. Okay? So everyone knew it was morally wrong. Now, there were a bunch of people in the South try to fight and say it was morally right and that blacks were subservient biblically beneath whites, and tried to spit all those lies to people. And yeah, there was that propaganda was going around. But they were wrong, as they've been proved to have been wrong about that. But a lot of people want to come out. I just want to put this video out and say, from a legal standpoint, a lot of people want to say the South was wrong. The South was not wrong. The South was not wrong in trying to leave the Union. The South had begun to take measures to develop its own economy, to be insular from the United States. This has never been done before in history, has never been done after. You have to realize what these dudes did. They took 22 different states, banded them together, took over U.S. mints, made their own currency. These guys had different treaties from Britain, had treaties from South America. If you're familiar with the Confederados of Brazil, who are Confederate soldiers who left the United States and moved to Mexico and Brazil and populated those areas because they wanted that sovereignty. You know, the Civil War is a very deep topic, and we've talked right now, we've already talked for almost 20 minutes about how it started and what it was really truly all about. If anybody has any disagreements about this video, I post them below. I'll kindly answer. I love to share Civil War knowledge with everyone I meet in life. I've been to reenactments. I love reenactments. I'm going to start going back to reenactments in the future. I'm just a huge Civil War guy. I buy Confederate money. Like, I really love the history of the Civil War. And a lot of people use their position in life to misconstrue what really the Civil War was all about. Okay? It was about things greater than slavery. It was about sovereignty. Right? It was about true sovereignty. And whether you agree with a warrior's aims or not, you cannot fault a warrior for dying a warrior's death. There were a lot of people in the Confederacy that were racist and horrible people. But as a warrior, I cannot look down on another warrior. I don't have to agree with that warrior. But a lot of those guys died honorable deaths. And if you study a lot of the Confederacy and see that how those guys were running 20 miles a day, their exercise routines, the amount of skill and military tactics that went into a lot of the things they were doing that are not taught in your high school, colleges, or elementary or middle schools, you'll start to realize what the Civil War was really all about. It showed the strength of America, a unified America. But it's also a lesson to all of us in a weaker position, to all of the people who don't have the power to obtain true autonomy themselves. It also gives you a blueprint, if you're wise enough to see it, of how you can go about obtaining that for yourself and for your family and for your friends and for your tribe and for your nation. The Haitian Revolution does the same thing. The Nigerian Biafra War does the same thing. Everything you learn in history should be utilized and put into your life to make your life better. Learn from the mistakes of others. And when we specifically talk about the Civil War, it's a great way to learn from our past mistakes in history. Before I let you guys go, I want to say this. There's been a lie going around. I don't want to say it's a Republican lie, but a lot of people in the Republican Party tell this lie about the amount of slave owners during slavery. The amount of slave owners. 25% of all American families during the Civil War and before the Civil War were slave owners. In states such as Mississippi and other southern states, up to 50% of all families were slave owners. These are statistics that have been lied about. So I just wanted to get the true statistic out there to you guys. So overall, as in a country, North and South combined, 25% of all families before and after the war were slave owners. Okay. So I just want to put that out there. If you have any questions about the Civil War, I have a lot of history. I have a lot of friends who own bookstores. I have a lot of knowledge about the Civil War, so just hit me back. All right, have a great week, guys. Keep retaining. God bless.